Hey guys, how's it going? Today we're going to be building this Kanban layout in Angular using the Angular CDK to create these draggable cards which we can drag and drop to reposition in their column and also transfer them to other columns. So stay tuned to learn exactly how you can implement this Kanban layout. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is go to the directory where I want to create my Angular application and then use the Angular CLI to create the application. And add a few flags here. So style is equal to SCSS and routing is equal to true. So once the Angular application has been created, I'm going to change directory and go to that project folder. And then I'm going to open it in code. So now the first thing I want to do is go to the terminal and install Boma, which is the CSS framework which we'll be using. Alright, so now we want to go to the source folder and to styles.scss, and we want to import the Boma source files here. So do @import node modules /Boma /Boma.sass. There we go. And we want to create a file as well called main-styles.scss. Here is where we'll put our global styles and change the Boma variables. So global styles and changing Boma variables. Okay. So the first thing I want to do here is import a Google font, or import. There we go. Okay, so now we want to import two fonts, which are Lato and Nunito, which we'll be using in this project. So now we want to set the main font family. So we'll use this variable here, family-sans-serif, and say Nunito, there we go, and sans serif. Okay, now we want to update some of Boma's component variables, so let's just change those, and now let's create the global styles. So global styles. Okay, so here we want to put some styles on the HTML and the body, and we'll set the height to 100%, and on HTML we want to set a background image. So for this project we're going to be using a triangulify background like this, and I've pre-made one, and I'm going to grab that now and paste it in the assets folder here. So I'm going to go and get that now. Alright, so we want this BG2, and I'm going to make a copy of this, and I'm going to rename this to background, and I'm going to drag and drop this into the assets folder. There we go. And don't worry, because that background will be in the GitHub repository, so don't worry, because you can just grab that from the GitHub repo. Okay, so here we'll now do, so now here we'll set the background image and set the URL, and we'll say it's in assets /background.svg, there we go, and we'll set the background size to cover, and also we'll just set the overflow Y to auto and make that important. Okay, so save that now, and that's all we need to do for the main styles. So now what I want to do is actually serve this application using ngserve so that we can see how it currently looks. Okay, so now let's go to localhost 4200, and we have our application here. Alright, so we've got this here now, but we can see that the background image hasn't been set, so there's something wrong here. So let's go back, and oh yeah, okay, so that's because we haven't imported it to styles.scss. So let's import it here. Main-styles.css. That should now work. If I save that and go back to our app, there we go. So we now get this nice triangular background, which is great. Okay, so now we can start actually developing the application. So let's go back to our code, and I'm going to get a terminal up here. So let's use the Angular CLI to generate a new component. So ng generate component, and I'm going to put this component in the pages folder. So pages / and then the name of the component will be main view. Okay, so press enter there. So that's been generated now. So let's go to app, and now we have a pages folder, and here we have a main view folder with our component code. Great. Okay, so let's go to the HTML first, and we see that we have the main view works here. The first thing I actually want to do is go to the routing module and set up the routes so that we can see the main view component when we go to the /root. Okay, so let's create a new root object here, and let's set the path to empty, and set the component to main view component. Okay, save that, and now let's go back to our app, and we can see here main view works. So the main view is being loaded in when we go to the empty root. Okay, so okay, so let's go back to our code, and let's go to app component.html, and let's delete this placeholder content here so that we just have the router outlet. Save that and go back to our app, and now we just have main view works, which is great. Okay, so now let's go back, close this, and let's work on the main view. Alright then, so the first thing I want to create is a div with a class of root. Okay, so in here, okay, so the first thing we want to put here is a navbar. So let's create a navbar, which has a background dark. And these classes that I'm using here are part of the Boma CSS framework, by the way. Okay, so now we can have the navbar brand. And inside there we have a navbar item. And here we can put a heading that says Kanban. And we'll set class here to app-name and has gradient text. These two classes here we have to create now. So let's go to the styles file, the main-view.component.css, and let's create these classes. So let's start off with the root, because that's something we have to define here. So root, and it will be a flex box. The flex direction will be column, and the heights will be 100%. Okay, there we go. So now we'll create the class app name, which has a font size of 28 pixels, a font weight of bold, and a font family of Lato, or a sans serif font. Okay, there we go. Alright, so that's pretty much it for the app name class. So now we can create the class for has gradient text. And here we will be using a special technique to create some gradient text. So we'll set the background as a linear gradient, and the first color in the gradient will be a blue with a hex color code of 13F7F4, and the second color code here will be a green, so it's going to be a 2A598. There we go. So that's going to create our linear gradient. And now we have to set the background clip. So we'll set the background clip to text, and we'll set the text fill color here as transparent. Okay, so that's pretty much it for that. Now we can go to our app and see what's happening. Okay, so we're not getting any gradient text here. That's interesting. Oh yeah, because we haven't completed this, so it's has gradient text. Okay, so let's save that. And now we have this nice gradient text here in the navbar. Awesome. Okay, so now we can create the board. So a div with a class of board, and then we're going to create the board bar, which will have the name of the board. So a paragraph of board-name. In here we'll just say board name. Later we will set this so that it's dynamic, but for now we'll just set it to board name. So now let's go into the .scss file and let's create the styles for these. So let's create the board bar, and we'll set the background to a gray that has 50% opacity. There we go. And we'll set some padding here as well. So 8 pixels on the top and bottom, and 15 pixels on the left and right. Okay, so now we can save that, and let's go and see what's happening. So now we have this nice gray bar here, which has some transparency, and we have the board name here, which we still have to style. So let's go back to the styling, and let's create a board-name class, and let's set the font size to 20 pixels, and let's set the font weight to bold, and let's set the color to white. Okay, there we go. And now we can go and check our app. Okay, so now we have this styling being applied. Okay, so since we're using Sass, we can actually nest these classes. So let's nest the board bar and the board name. So the board name goes into board bar. There we go. And also we can create the board class, and we can move these classes into board. There we go. Okay, and now we can actually create the styling for board. So let's set the display to flex, and let's set the flex direction as column, and flex grow to 1 so that it takes up all of the remaining space. Okay, and here we have to set the min width to 0 and the min height to 0 as well, and this is purely to override some automatic sizing properties in Flexbox. So now we can go back to the HTML, to the template, and we can now create the actual board. So let's create a wrapper class. So board-wrapper, and in here we'll have the columns. Here we'll have a board-column. Okay, so now let's go into the styling and create the CSS classes for the board wrapper, the board columns, and the board column. Okay, so let's create the styles now. So board-column, columns, and board-wrapper. There we go. And we can actually nest these. Let's nest these. Okay, so here we're gonna set the display to flex as usual, and set the flex grow to 1 as usual, and set the overflow X to auto, so that we get the scroll bars when there is overflow in the x-axis. So now we can do the board columns, and here we'll set the display to flex and the flex grow to 1 as well. Here we'll set the board column now. So the board column class will have a display of flex, flex direction column, and the background will be white but with 50% transparency. Okay, now we can actually go back to our app and we can see how it's looking. Okay, we can't see anything yet. Okay, so it's because it hasn't got any height. Okay, yeah, so that's because we forgot to put flex grow here. So flex grow 1, save that. Okay, we're still not getting in. Oh yeah, okay, yeah, so we are now getting something, and it's now grown to the full width and height of this area here. So it's kind of white, as you can see. And we can see that if we take away the transparency, that now it's all white here. Okay, so it is working. Okay, so let's change this back to 0.5, save that, and now let's set the min width to 300 pixels, and let's set the margin to 50 pixels, and the padding to 25 pixels, and also we have to set the flex basis here. Which is to force the columns to all be the same size regardless of the content. Okay, so now that we've got that, we can actually go to our app and see how it looks. Okay, so now we have one big column with some margin around it. which is great. One thing I want to do is actually add some border radius here. So let's go back here and let's set some border radius. Border radius will set to about 4 pixels. Save that. We now have rounded corners here, which is great. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to go and try and make multiple columns. So let's copy and paste this column here. So we now have 3 columns. Let's save that and see how it looks. We now have 3 big columns here, which is great. One issue we have here though is that the gaps here and here are much larger than the gaps on the sides. And that's because there's 2 margins being set here. There's the margin from this box and there's the margin from this box here, which are both creating twice the amount of space that's needed. So we can actually write some CSS to fix that. And if we go here and say, and not the first child, then set the margin left to 0. And let's see now. And now they're all spaced evenly. There's the same exact space here and here and here. So they're all spaced evenly. Great. So let's go back to the template, and inside the board column, we'll create a column title. And inside the column title, we'll put to do and save that. And if you go to our app now, we can see that it has the to do here. Let's actually put this on the first one, not on the last one. Let's just copy them to all of them. So let's set this last one to done, and this middle one is to do, and this one here as ideas. Let's save that now, and we now have these texts here. Great. Now what we have to do is we have to go to the style file and create some styling for the column title class. So let's go here and let's create the column title, and let's set the font size to 20 pixels and font weight as 800, so pretty heavy, and set the font family as Lato or sans serif, and set text transform to uppercase, and set the margin bottom to 20 pixels. Okay, save that and let's go back to our app. And we now have these headings here. One thing I want to try and do actually is create more columns and see what happens. So let's try and do that now. Let's copy this column here and paste it a few times. Okay, save this now and go back to our app. And we now have these all the same width and nicely spaced, which is great. Let's try and create a few more and see what happens. So now we have an overflow and we have the scroll bar here to scroll, which is great because it means that these columns aren't being squashed too much, and this is because we've specified the minimum width. Okay, so now let's go back and let's delete all of these columns here so that we just have 3. Okay, so now we just have 3 here, which is great. Okay, but let's actually add one more because it looks a bit too big here. So let's actually add another column. So let's copy this one here. Let's change this one to research. Save that. And that looks a bit better now. So now we have the 4 columns here. So now what we want to do is we want to create the task boxes that will go here. Okay, so let's create that now. So let's go to the markup, and in the ideas column, let's create a few tasks. So we will first create a container for these tasks. So let's call it tasks container. And then within that, we can create a task, and we can say, this is something that I want to do, Save that. And now let's go to our app and see what it looks like. So we now have this text here, but we want to style it so that it has a white background and a shadow and some padding. Okay, so let's add that now in the styles. Okay, so let's go to the bottom here. And let's create the tasks container. and we'll set that as flex grow 1, and that's it for now. And we'll create the task class here, and we'll set the displacer flex, and we'll set the padding to 15 pixels on the top and bottom, and to 12 pixels on the left and right. So save that now. So we can now see that there's some padding. Now let's add a background. So background will be white, and we'll also set a border bottom to add some depth to this task box. So we'll say solid 1 pixels DDD, save that, and let's go back to our app. And we now have this card, which is looking pretty good. Let's actually set some border radius. So let's go and set some border radius to 4 pixels. Save that, and that looks a lot better. And we now have to add a box shadow so that we can easily differentiate this task box with its container. So let's create the box shadow here, and I'm actually just going to copy this box shadow that I've created before because it's quite long to type out, but it's a pretty simple box shadow which has 2 layers essentially, but it's a pretty simple box shadow. So save that and go back to the app, and now we have this nice box shadow here, which is great. Okay, so now we can go back here, and we can now test this out with multiple tasks. Let's copy and paste this task. Okay, save this and go back to our app. And now we have all of these tasks, which looks pretty good, but it would be better if we had some spacing in between them. So let's go back to the styling, and let's set some margin. So let's set the margin bottom to 15 pixels. And there we go, that looks a lot better. Okay, so that's pretty much it. We're pretty much finished with the tasks. So now we can get into the fun bit, which is integrating the Angular CDK so that we can create a drag and drop effect, so that we can drag and drop these tasks to these containers. Okay, so let's go back to the code, and let's go to the Angular CDK website. Okay, so let's go to the CDK, and let's go to drag and drop. Let's also go and find the... So first thing we have to do is install the CDK. So let's go back to our code, and in the terminal, type in npm install @angular/CDK, and save that as well. Okay, so now we've got the CDK installed, which is great. So now we can go and go to the example that they've got here. Which is up here, which is drag and drop connected sorting, and here it's using the CDK drop list connected to property. So let's try this out with our app. So let's click on the view source, and here we can see the code that we have to use to implement this same functionality in our application. Okay, so we need to create a list in the TypeScript file, and we then have to connect that list to this div here, and we then also have to create the drop method in the component class as well. Okay, so let's do that. Let's click on the TS tab here to see the TypeScript code, and actually let's just copy and paste this code here, and go back to our app, and go to this TypeScript file, and just paste it here. Okay, so we're getting some errors here, and this is because we haven't imported this CDK stuff. So let's go back here, and let's import the CDK stuff from here, and paste it here. Okay, so we don't get the error anymore. Okay, so now let's go to the template, and let's start integrating these tasks here with the to-do list here. So let's go back to the documentation, and let's just see what they're doing. So they're using the CDK drop list directive, and they're setting a template reference to-do list to the CDK drop list, and then they are listening for the CDK drop list dropped event, which will then run the method drop with the event data passed into it, which is what we've created here. And basically what this code does is it will move the item within the array if the previous container is equal to the current container that it's been dragged into, which makes sense, right? Because it has to move the item within the same array because it's within the same container. Or if the item has been moved out of the container, then it will use the transfer array item method, and it will just pass these in as parameters to transfer the array item to a new container. Now what we want to do is we just want to hook it up. So let's go here and let's just copy this code here. So let's copy that. So here we can see that they're using a list container which has the class of example list, and then within that div they have the div with the class of example box, which then they are looping through. So that's basically what we have, but the example list class is called board column in our case. So this div here is the equivalent of this board column div in our case. So let's just copy it to the board column. Okay, and let's just indent this, and there we go. Okay, so now we've got this, and we can now see if we have to change anything. We don't have to change anything here, apart from removing this class here, because we've got our class already. So that's pretty much it there. Now let's see if we can drag them. So let's go back to our app. Okay, we're getting an error, I think. I think it's because we haven't imported. Yeah, okay, so it's because we haven't imported the module. So that's what we have to do first. So let's go back to our code. And let's go to the app.module.ts. And let's import the drag and drop module here. There we go. And let's put it in the imports. There we go. Save that. Close that. And we should now have it here. Okay, so now there's no errors here, which is great. Let's close the console. And we should be able to drag these. Okay, so we can't drag these yet. So let's go back to our code and see what's happening. CDK drop list. Oh, right, yeah, because we haven't put the CDK drop directive on the tasks yet. So let's do that now. Let's put it here, for example, and just save that. And let's see what happens now. Oh, no, the CDK drag, I think. Drag. Okay, so now it works. So now we have a draggable task, which is pretty cool. And now we want to implement the functionality so that we can drop them into these boxes here. Alright then, okay, so let's go back to our code. And the first thing I want to do here is get rid of these tasks here. And also, let's go to the documentation. Let's not use the drop list connected to. Let's use the drop list group directive instead, which will be easier. And it's also better because we can then dynamically generate the columns as well. So let's switch to using the drop list group. So let's look at the code for this one. So we have the drop list group on the parent div. Then we have the container. Then we have this div here, which has the drop list directive. Okay, so let's go and implement that now. We have to change some of this code here. So let's get rid of this directive here. And then let's copy and paste this. And let's put it instead on the tasks container. So let's do that now. Okay, save this. And then we have to put the drop list group on the board columns. So drop list group. There we go. So let's save that and let's go to our app. And now we have a draggable card here and it's still working. So now let's try and implement that for the other columns as well. But first of all, let's make these task cards dynamic. Let's use an ng4. Let item of to do, which is the collection that's in the component class here. And let's save that and let's use string interpolation here to show the item. Let's save that and let's go to our app. And we now have a card for each of the items in the array. Great. So now let's now do the same thing for the other columns. So let's copy and paste this tasks container. Copy and paste that. And let's go to the research column and paste that. So let's change this to done because that is the name of the other array in the component class here. Okay, and just save that. And let's change this to done as well. And that's pretty much it. Let's go to our app. And we now have a card for each of the items in the done array. Great. And now let's see if we can drag in between them. Okay, that's great. So now we can now drag and drop these cards and move cards in between these arrays. Great. That's pretty cool. So now we want to style the drag state. So let's go to our style sheet and let's go to the documentation because there is some styling that we can copy and paste from here. What we need are these three classes here. Let's copy and paste these. And we also need this class here. So let's copy that and let's paste that here. Let's just fix this indentation. Okay. And here we have to change this to tasks container. And we also have to change this class here to task. Okay, there we go. So now let's go to our app. And now we should now see a change in the drag state and a nice transition. So there we have the transition. Great. And we also see that there's a stronger box shadow while we're dragging. Great. So let's drag it to this one. And we have a nice animation there. And let's drop it. And there we go. So we now have a nice drag and drop animation. And now what we want to do is we want to now make this all dynamic. So let's go back to our code. And we are going to create some models for our data. So now let's create a folder called models. So new folder models, and that's in the app folder. And now let's create a new file called board.model.ts, and let's create the model. So here we will now create the constructor and use a TypeScript feature which allows us to define fields of a class within the constructor. So let's do that now. And the first field will be the name. And the second field will be the columns, which will be of type column array. And that is a model that we've not created yet. So let's do that. And now let's create the columns model. So new file column.model.ts. And let's do the same thing for the columns. So create the class. Create the constructor with a public name of type string, and it has tasks, which is a string array. There we go. Save that. That's all done. And let's go back to the board model and let's import the column model. So there we go. So we have now created the two models, and we can save this now and close them. And now let's go to the component class of main view. So now we can create a board field here. So board, which will be of type board. There we go. And here we can now create that board. So new board. We need a name for this board, which we'll call test board. And we now need the columns, which will be a column array. So let's create the array here. And now let's create some columns. So new column. So first of all, we'll have the ideas column. Then we have the tasks array. So let's create that. And here we'll say some random idea. Alright then, okay, that's all we need for that. Okay, and now let's create a new column. So a new column, and we'll call this research. And then we'll create the tasks. So okay, so I've just put some random text here. And let's create a third column here. Okay, so new column, which we'll call to do. And we'll put the tasks here. And here what I'll do is just copy and paste the ones that I've got here. So copy that and paste it. And we'll now do the final one, which will be the done. So new column, done. And we have our tasks, which we can just get from here and paste those there. Save that. And we can now delete these two arrays. Save that. So now what we want to do is go to the template, and we now want to make this dynamic. So what we can do is we can get rid of these columns here. So now we just have one column. So here what we want to do is we want to create an ng4. Let column of board.columns. And here we can now use string interpolation to get that. Column.name. In the tasks container, we can now set, we don't actually need this here, actually, so let's get rid of this. And here we can put column.tasks. And here we can do let item of column.tasks. There we go. So we've now made that dynamic. Let's see if that now works. So let's go to our app. And there we go. So we now get a completely dynamic Kanban board with these cards being loaded in completely dynamically using ng4s and the board object that we have, which is great. So let's see if we can now drag them. Amazing, there we go. Alright then, so that's pretty much it for this tutorial. We have successfully created a Kanban board where we are dynamically loading in the tasks using the board object. There we go, so that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.